Welcome, everybody, to our BWO recap of yesterday's big event, the North Sea Summit in Hamburg. It was so great to see so much attention on the offshore wind sector. We had heads of states there, we had energy ministers from countries around the North Sea. And I'm really happy to have a number of experts here to discuss what happened there in Hamburg yesterday and talk about takeaways, implications, and the road ahead. My name is Hans Sohn. I'm heading the policy and communications activities of BWO. And happy to talk about decisions, about opportunities for cooperation in Europe and expectations for implementation. Do a quick round of introduction of our experts we have here today and talk about the outcomes of the summit and in the fields of energy policy, industrial policy, and security issues. Looking forward to 1.5 hours of discussion and great to have you with us. We have alphabetical order of introduction. I was expecting Niels Anger, who will join us in a few minutes, I hope, the host of yesterday's summit from the German Ministry for Economic Affairs and Energy. And happy to have you here, Catherine Boyd from the British Embassy in Berlin, who's Deputy Trade Commissioner for Europe and Country Director Trade Germany at the Embassy. And you previously worked at the British Cabinet Office and you were involved in the UK-EU trade negotiations after Brexit. And you were in Hamburg yesterday, just like everybody else, except for myself. So thank you for joining us. Great to have you here. We also expected to have Bertel Dons Christensen. He called in sick just a few hours ago. Wish him a speedy recovery, and we're really happy to have Amanda Alberg from the Danish Embassy in Berlin with us. Thank you so much for joining at last minute, and great to have you here. And last but not least, in our round, our highest representative of our association, Irina Lucke, Managing Director and Division Lead of Omexom and head of our BWO Executive Board, brings in almost 20 years in the offshore wind industry. Thank you so much for joining us today. Yes, let's start with you, Irina. You were in Hamburg yesterday. As I said, you are highest representative of our association. You joined the event. You were at the security table. How was it? Was it time well spent in Hamburg yesterday?
I'm sorry, I was still on mute. The time was very well spent. Thank you. It was quite an event. Not what I experience daily, so it was a privilege to be there. And as a European, and I'm saying that from the bottom of my heart, it was a great event because something, for me, great happened. We had a clear message in all panels, at all round tables, that Europe is moving closer together again, and it was emphasized every time. And also, there were a clear message that the European energy supply and security are top priorities. And that is something I haven't seen in the last couple of years. We have more like Germany is doing something, Austria, Netherlands, just name it. But here we had a really strong message, and that gave me an extremely positive feeling also for the upcoming things that might happen to Europe. And it was expressed by, let me say, from my perspective, 5 top statements. That's the declaration itself, with 300 gigawatts offshore wind to be built by 2050, the 100 gigawatt cross-border, very important for the industry, the joint investment pact. Then strengthening, unfortunately, we need to do so, strengthening offshore security. And something the industry also needs very urgently is a more efficient joint planning. So that is an outcome of one day. So now we have to put it in force, but nevertheless, it's great news, and I think strengthens the confidence tremendously.
Yes, thank you very much. Good to hear your impressions. We'll talk about some of the elements you mentioned later on, and happy to give the microphone to Kat to hear about your perspective. What stood out most in political terms or economical terms from your perspective, Kat?
Thank you very much. And first, let me say that hats off to the BMWA and to Niels and the team on the German side for putting together an amazing summit, which sent lots of incredibly positive signals, I think, to industry in terms of where we're going to go next. So well done, Niels. From our side, I think for us, there were a couple of things that really stood out. Firstly, as Irina said, we're moving not just from stating targets, which are kind of a lot of national targets put together, which is what makes up the 300 gigawatts, but also making a commitment as governments to the cross-border cooperation, so the 100 gigawatts, which is something new. And I think coming along with that is what our Secretary of State, what our Energy Minister, Ed Miliband, called a strategic approach. So this cannot be ad hoc. We can't just wait and hope that everything will come together eventually so that industry can develop this meshed grid. We have to be a lot more intentional about it, and we have to intervene as governments, regulators, and businesses to make this happen. And for me, the most promising aspect of this is that you see now a focus on concrete projects and on pilot projects. And I think that's critical to demonstrating that what we're talking about, that the hybrid connections can work in practice. You know, it's only by actually doing this that we're going to learn what works best.
Yeah, thank you very much. Let's move over to Amanda from a for a Danish perspective. How was your day in Hamburg yesterday, and what are you taking with you?
Yes, it was a really exciting day, and I also want to start by thanking the German organizers. They did a tremendous job, and also the summit has grown a lot, especially compared to the first one in Esbjerg a few years ago. So hats off to them and for making it possible. I think my main takeaway is how much we can learn from each other, and also to draw upon each other's experience. We don't all need to make the same mistakes when it comes to tendering, also when it comes to spatial planning, and as many other factors. So I'm very excited about the content of the declarations, but also the quality of the discussions, both in the energy ministers' panels during the day, and also from what I heard from my colleagues about the closed roundtable. I also think the summit is really a sign of what we can achieve when we work together. And the outcomes underline the importance of collaboration, harmonization across regulatory frameworks, and also sending coherent messages to the European wind industry. I'm also very happy as a Dane that Europe stands by the need to switch to renewables in times where some other countries are starting to question the need of renewable energy and switching back to fossil energy. So making sure that Europe produces its own energy and having European supply chains and manufacturing will not only increase our energy security, but it's also going to support economic growth and job creation in Europe. And I was very happy that all of these perspectives were present at the summit yesterday.
Yeah, thank you very much. So we have a number of positive messages that we taken away from the summit. Yeah, great to have the host here, Niels Anger. Thank you for joining us. We already introduced you to some part before you joined. Great to have you with us now. Looks like you're in Deutsche Bahn. Is that true? Hope the connection is stable. And yeah, congratulations also from our side to the wonderful event yesterday. How was your time? What was your impression? Did the summit meet your expectations?
Yes, thank you, and good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining in also high quantities I see here in the audience. So sorry for being a bit loud here in the train, but yeah, I'm back on the way back to Berlin with the team. I hope you can hear me well. Sometimes maybe the connection is interrupted, so I'll do my best. I can tell you that the minister, but also the chancellor yesterday, we got very positive feedback from their side, also from the round of heads of state that were present of the key in see states, and we had all.
Okay, that's Deutsche Bahn experience we've all had before. We cannot hear you well at the moment. Niels, let's wait for a few seconds if you will be back. Unfortunately, this seems to take a little longer, so we move on to the next.
There, and the Commissioner for Energy and for us.
Okay. Okay, I'm sorry, there was just a little gap of a few seconds. Maybe you want to just recap what you just said in the last half minute, maybe?
So
Connection
can you hear me
poor.
again? Sorry.
Yes, yeah, without picture might work even better.
Yeah, connection is poor. Okay, let's try another one. Otherwise, I come back a bit later when the connection is better. Yeah. So I just wanted to highlight that. Very good. That the participation, of course, was as expected from our side. So we are proud, of course, that we had all energy ministers, the Commissioner for Energy, and NATO participating, but also in terms of the heads of state from the key North Sea countries. I can just confirm that the Chancellor and the Minister were very happy with the outcomes of the summit. I think to highlight a few, besides the declarations, of course, I think the investment pact is key.
Okay, so the connection is too poor.
It shows not only political commitments, but also commitments by.
Okay, yeah, I've traveled a lot between Hamburg and Berlin, and let's hope for better connection in the near future, hopefully in a few minutes. Happy to move on to the other panelists. You've mentioned Niels' investment pact, which was probably one of the most important elements of yesterday's agreements for us as an industry. In our media statements, we highlighted the importance of stability. We've had lots of ups and downs in the sector in Germany and hope to get more stability via European cooperation in the near future. So the big question now is how we're going to implement this beautiful commitment of 15 gigawatts offered over a period of 15 gigawatts annually offered over a period of 10 years. What are your expectations? Let's start with Amanda. You're probably not used to negotiate with others and what year Denmark will be offering X number of gigawatts. What are your expectations? How is that going to happen?
So my expectation is that it's going to be a much closer coordination because we all benefit from it, not having these peaks by 2030 where it's hard to get things delivered on time, and then an uncertainty in the industry. So having much more collaboration and also discussion and seeing how the timelines match. But it's also important to say that, for example, for Denmark, there are some tenders happening right now. So this intention of better coordination doesn't change the ongoing tenders that have already been decided, at least from the Danish side. And then looking forward, we would do so and take into account the other European countries and their tenders.
Yeah. So this going to happen on an EU level? Probably not, because we need the UK on board. Kat, you just had a wonderful big auction of 8.5 gigawatts successfully auctioned. That would be roughly half of what's going to be offered in a few years. So what are your expectations? How is the UK prepared to integrate their ambitions into what other European countries are doing?
Well, firstly, let's just say that this commitment to 15 gigawatts annually is really, really good news for investors and for the supply chain. I mean, that's what we've been hearing repeatedly, that we've got to move away from this boom and bust cycle in terms of the demand signals. And so us taking concrete steps now to do more to coordinate is going to be very helpful, and it would be very good to hear feedback from industry as we start to implement this. Obviously, the UK is contributing a huge volume to the wind pipeline, with, if you exclude China, the largest pipeline of offshore wind projects in the world. And you've just mentioned our auction round 7, Hans, which has been incredibly successful. And I think that in and of itself, the 8.4 gigawatts we just tendered sends a very positive signal to industry, because after a number of failed or quite weak auctions across Europe, including in the UK, we now see that if you carefully design your auction and you learn lessons from previous experience, you can deliver like record-breaking outcomes. And it's actually a very good signal for Germany, UK-Germany cooperation as well, with RWE and partners winning 6.9 gigawatts of the contracts. Obviously, to make this work, governments are going to have to be flexible. And I think a positive sign for that is in the UK and Germany's bilateral declaration that we published yesterday, where we talk about how both sides are going to look at their national frameworks and be willing to introduce reforms in order to make a reality of a meshed grid. Another couple of things I would just point out are the importance of the industry collaboration. And I think the OTC group stepping forward with such a strong voice on what is required from TSOs across borders does make this coordination and cooperation easier, because we know now what will work in the different national contexts. And I would also say that domestic reforms are important too. In the UK, we're currently working on a strategic spatial energy plan. And what that means is we as a government are going to come to a much clearer idea of exactly where we need to put generation and grid capacity in order to meet demand in the UK. And that will allow us to be more intentional about which projects we accelerate and support. And I think that kind of action domestically is going to help us very much to coordinate with other European partners.
Yeah, thank you very much. We seem to have Niels back on board. My question to the others, not sure if you could hear it, was what are your expectations for us? The investment pact is very good, very positive. These sign, and that must be something new for national governments to actually coordinate the number and amount of tendering volumes across Europe. What are your expectations? How is that going to happen?
maybe I chip in because I have a good connection now. So let me just try to pitch all messages in one go. So
Go ahead.
just a big thanks also to I think to industry, both developers, TSOs, but also manufacturers. I think it was very important that we have a good cooperation before the summit with Wind Europe in particular, with PWO and others that and the OTC of course. So I think I want just to convey the message that the leaders, the chancellor, but also middle level. And on the commitments, you're fully right to point out to the investment pact, because that was also taken up by the press, the 15 gigawatt, of course, but on lowering the LCOE and also increasing investments to 10 billion to 2030. I think this was caught up. So I think in terms of deliverables, besides the declarations and the investment pact, now is the time also to implement. And we're looking to the NSEC presidency, of course, in 2026, where we'll follow up the action plan, the offshore financing framework, together with you in order to bring the projects forward. I also wanted to highlight the. Okay, well, it will be. Okay, that was just an emergency, but it's all fine. I want to highlight also Bornholm Energy Island, that we concluded yesterday an agreement with Denmark on this, on the cost sharing, which was really important to also show this. This was not only a conference, but it's also about real projects. And we hope that the set of projects by the OTC, but also proposals by other North Sea states and also Baltic Sea states will go forward. And that will also require, as my UK colleague has just said, a stable investment framework. We've seen, of course, the successful tender in the UK. But we also, I think, need to see stable investment frameworks such as CFDs, cross-border CFDs, coming up in the next years in order to bring this market stability and investment certainty for the wind farms. So I think we have a bit of homework to do on this side, but I'm quite confident that the summit gave the right impulse for that. And we could also say it's the start of the work now, end of the summit, but start of the work in order to bring projects forward and set the conditions right.
Yeah, thank you very much, Niels. I'd like to refer to some of the statements we just heard. We heard from Kat that UK seen failed auctions. They've learned from it. They reorganized the systems and were successful with it. We are pointing to this experience as a very good example of how we can move forward in Germany. We need more investment security. That's what we're also saying. Maybe just pointing to you, Irina. What are your thoughts? Why is it so important to have a CFD in Germany also? And how confident are you that the levelized cost of electricity of offshore wind projects will fall over next 10 years, about 30%, as agreed in one of yesterday's declarations? What are the expectations? Is that going to happen through CFDs or just by having the stability and the good outlook of 15 gigawatts per year over 10 years? What are your thoughts?
Yesterday, it was the UK and Danish representatives at Milliman and the Danish ambassador were very open, and they said we have been through a lessons learned time, and we've seen that the way the mechanism we used to apply for auction did not completely work. So we revised it, and I think that lessons learned is very valuable also for the German policymakers to take that lessons learned and not to experience it again in our country itself. So that's the idea of being part of Europe, learning from each other. So I think CFDs are a very good way to ensure reliability. and to give the industry, the supply chain, but also the project developers a good floor to plan their projects. I mean, we all know that an offshore wind farm needs about 5 to 10 years from the idea to being realized, and changing that in between is just killing investments. And that's something we need to face. And it was also very obvious, and it was stated very often yesterday, that CFDs are not a subsidy. They are a risk management instrument, and we should talk about that on this level. And I'm sure they will also lower substantially financing costs. That was also stated by the European Investment Bank. Other financing institute will also be more happier to have a CFD in their balance sheet when it comes to project financing. So I'm rather positive that the CFD will ensure a steady pipeline, but also will decrease the LCOE. But there's always a but. I think the CFD should not be the one and only holy grail. It's definitely the most important mechanism we should look at, but there were also messages from off-takers yesterday, especially Amazon, saying that they also need PPAs. So I think it's also worthwhile to think about good mechanism, how to combine PPAs and CFDs. But for sure, the key message is the CFD is tremendously important and should be a priority.
Yes, thank you very much. That's also what we've been saying in the past days. In our media work, we need the introduction of CFDs fast, or two-sided CFDs. Not sure if Niels can hear me now. We would like to ask him as a BMW representative, what do you know? We know that your ministry is somehow working on a new auction design. What can we realistically expect in terms of timing and design? Not sure if you want to spoil the news about the auction that we might see starting next week and due in June, which we said, please postpone it. Please don't do it in the old system. Please work on a new one. Give us two-sided CFDs and sometime, I don't know, as fast as possible, maybe end of the year, maybe early next year. What do you hear from your colleagues in the ministry?
Yes, I could hear you well. I hope you can hear me as well. So I think there are 2 points. The first is the transition to the CFD regime. I think it's EU regulation is anyway prescribing that. So it will come, of course. And the minister also said yesterday at the press conference that we will work on a CFD regime for offshore wind. So a reform of the Windseegesetz. This is ongoing. I would expect it in the course of this year, together with the reform of the EEG. On the current auction, this is still under assessment. I cannot give any news on this, but I think the path is clear, right? And yesterday the messages were also clear. We've seen the recent results of tenders in the North Sea. Some failed because of a lack of the CFD. And those that introduced a clear regime were successful. So I think the path is clear. But let me also underline that this is not only let's say, German question, but I think for cross-border projects, that was the focus of yesterday's summit. We will need support schemes in place in all partnering countries from the German perspective. You will also see that in the cooperation strategy that we put out yesterday and we published, there's very clear let's say, conditions that need to be in place in North Sea states in order to bring forward cooperation projects. And one example is the UK case. I think just to mention that we are really grateful that UK not only has put forward, as you said, a successful tender, but also works on the CFD regime for hybrid projects. And this is something which is really important in order to click together the systems. and facilitate cross-border support, because we won't see projects where only one government will provide support. There's probably will be more than two, and therefore we need to design CFD systems in the partnering countries so that they can be clicked together. We have the EEG in place where there's an opening clause, and of course this would also be welcome in other states. So progress is there, and I think the messages were received also by our minister yesterday. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you very much. We will go into hybrid projects in a minute. For us, it's also very important, maybe also a bit easier to understand how that will work. We talk about shared implementation of, for example, the German goals of the offshore wind expansion goals. We have a long-term target of 70 gigawatts until 2045, and we understand that if we manage to come to an agreement with your side, Amanda, with Denmark and maybe Sweden, we can have great benefits. We just commissioned a study by Fraunhofer Institute, Fraunhofer IWES, together with our colleagues from BDEW, and we very much like the results, which are as follows. If we manage to implement a certain share, let's look at a share of 20 gigawatts of, like parentheses, German projects in Danish or Swedish waters, and if we connect them directly to the German grid, we can get a lot more electricity from that, 13% or up to 13% more by lower costs. 11% could be possible. That seems very interesting from our side. Amanda, how is Denmark looking at this perspective? I noticed that it was mentioned in yesterday's agreement. We also have the ideas mentioned in the German coalition pact. Just give us some ideas on how Denmark is discussing that idea.
Yes. So we'll go into the Danish-German cooperation, but I just want to start a bit further back. So as you mentioned, as Denmark possesses really large sea areas, and they have a huge potential to supply Europe with clean energy with high full load hours. And this production potential is much higher than what is needed for Denmark's domestic energy demand. And in these geopolitical times, it's really important to stand together as Europe and also look at European needs and solutions when it comes to energy demand and supply. And therefore, I'm pleased to also tell you that the Danish government is in the process of changing a law so that it will allow offshore wind farms that are directly connected to other countries. So Denmark is getting the regulatory framework set up and ready for more cooperation in the offshore wind sector. And this is an important step, and I think it also sends a signal that Denmark is willing to go into dialogue about this and ready to cooperate. Locally in Denmark, there have also been some questions and criticism from some side that why should we have wind farms in our water if they're not going to supply us with electricity? And there, at least in the Danish government and from a political side, they again want to underline, the need for a European approach and more electricity production, and that will help to bring down the electricity prices, but it will also increase the energy security, and this benefits all of Europe, also Denmark. Then, of course, when it comes to the details, that will have to be negotiated between the part, and you have to look at, costs and benefits and so on. But we're excited about this change coming and open for a dialogue. And in the multilateral agreement between Denmark and Germany, there is also a mention both of cooperating in dialogue on both radial or possibility for radial projects as well as hybrid projects.
Yeah, very happy to hear that kind of progress, very positive news from your side. Thank you very much. Yeah, maybe just a bit of an explanation on the background. Why is that so interesting to use Danish or Swedish waters for the implementation of Germany's expansion goals? Offshore wind is most effective or most efficient. When you have space, space in Germany is somewhat limited compared to Danish waters, and if we manage to find that kind of agreement, we will have to create more space and we'll be able to leave more space between individual turbines. That will reduce wake effects, and so each single turbine will be able to produce more power. That's what we're expecting, and if we look at the cost side, even if cables might be a bit longer, it will be still more efficient to come to that kind of cooperation. So yeah, very much looking forward to this. It gets a bit more complicated in my view when we talk about hybrid projects. Energy Island Bornholm is one of these projects that we can see on the pipeline. Niels, you just mentioned it's also a bit complicated, or the most complicated part is probably sharing of costs and benefits. We've seen some progress, some news yesterday from the TSOs. What is your perspective on that? How are you able to explain this in easy language, what kind of system we can expect here?
Yes, thank you very much, and also thanks to the Danish colleague here. I think yesterday was a very good day for cooperation, not only between Denmark and Germany, but also all countries of the North Sea. But with Denmark, there's a particular case, as we have made more progress, or most progress, let's say, in the region. Also, well, yes. Also, I think with the UK, the progress is very good, but and also with others, other partner countries. But on Denmark, I think the particular point is that we agreed on Bornholm Energy Island after, I think, 5 years of work among the services. And the decisive point yesterday was the sharing of costs for the support of the wind farm. And this is, of course, a political point because it has budgetary implications. And it was necessary to conclude this yesterday because of investment decisions taken by the TSOs, as you rightly said, and also by the suppliers that, yeah, cable and also converter station suppliers that made contracts already. So it was necessary to strike this deal, and we will now move forward with an intergovernmental agreement on Bornholm to put this in legal terms and format. The main idea is to share costs and benefits according to the electricity flows from the wind farm electricity, both to Denmark and Germany. As you know, it's a hybrid project. And there will be a Danish auction, a tender on the wind farm, and Germany is contributing financially to that tender. That is the idea. So you can also expect a two-sided CFD there. Plans are now ongoing on the Danish side to further specify the tender design. This will be in the course of this year, so that we can hopefully see a tender next year running. And the plan is to have the first wind farms connected in 2034.
Okay, so about 8 years. That's good to hear. Thank you very much for giving us some insights into that, I think, very complicated topic. Happy to move on to some industrial policy aspects of what happened yesterday in Hamburg. The plan is, and that's also what we support as a group, to have a high share of European manufacturing, high share of European parts being used for the offshore wind expansion in Europe. So maybe over to you, Irina. What is your perspective? You're representing BWO here. How do you look at that topic? Are we ready for a ramp up of the European supply chain? How do you look at that issue?
If the statements and the declarations which were made yesterday are put into action, I'm completely confident that the supply chain will ramp up. You mentioned that during the introduction. I'm doing offshore wind now for 20 years. I started 2006 with Alpha Ventus, and in the last 20 years, I've seen it going up and down, a little bit up and a little bit down again. So that is something every one of us needs to work on to make the industry more resilient, more trustworthy. Bless you, Catherine, and more stable. So having the faith and the true belief and the proof that what is been said and decided yesterday will stay for the next 10 years. I'm very sure that the investments within the industry will be made. We see that large OEMs will invest in new yards, in new production facilities. So if we look today at the path where the offshore wind farms will be built, we see there will be bottlenecks because a lot of wind farms will come up in early 30s. So we see the need for vessels, for cables, but also very much for large converter platforms, for steel. So it is mandatory to have this development path synchronized in Europe, but also in Germany for sure, and that the industry and the OEM and the manufacturers can cope with that. But again, yesterday with all the people I spoke to, everyone was saying, let us go, we will do our utmost. And of course, also decreasing the LCE is very ambitious. But again, in the last 20 years, the industry has shown that of what they are capable. Today, offshore wind is a commodity, and that's one of the greatest stories ever. So long-term clarity and credible project pipelines are the two things we should work on.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, I just noticed that while you were speaking, Niels Anger has left the chat. Thank you very much, Niels. You can't hear us anymore, but it was great to have you with us. Yeah, you mentioned some of the bottlenecks that we're facing over the next years. One of the bottlenecks is ports. We don't have enough port space, and most projects that have been implemented in the last years were installed from the Netherlands and from Denmark. So over to you, Amanda. What is your expectation? Is the Danish supply chain ready for the ramp up? We noticed some delayed investment decisions on your side. How do you look at that phenomenon?
Yes. As Irina also said, the last few years have been a bit slow, and also, as was mentioned yesterday, it's been hard. It's been affected by inflation. It's been harder to get components. Projects have gotten delayed, and hasn't been enough capacity. But I think that the main message that I took away, at least from the discussions yesterday, was that we are ready for a ramp up, but there needs to be a very clear signal, and the industry also needs to be able to rely on that those political signals will also stick and that it will be, put through. And those signals, I think, were made yesterday in the declarations as well as in the speeches. I think I have an optimistic view that we have now sent the signal that underlining the European commitment to offshore wind as a key technology in driving the green transition. And I think what's important to move forward and to make sure that this can really succeed is for governments to help to reduce risk. We were already talking about the CFDs before, but also in general to handle the geopolitical uncertainty. And there I think that the dialogue will also have to continue in the NSEC forum, also in different groups and working level. And it's not a clear key to how do we deal with geopolitical uncertainty, because probably in the next few years things will keep happening, and of course when you tender something you have to put the criteria in that. So how do we find a tool that will give the certainty so that we're not changing the rules post tenders, but still have some kind of flexibility or help de-risk and handle the uncertainty. And I think there, at least there's an acknowledgement from the political side, and there's a willingness to do what we can, to be clear on the things where we can, but also to keep working on the other uncertainty and find some tools to handle that. But I think in general, that it's also important that we harmonize the different rules when it comes to tenders, but also when it comes to support schemes, non-price criteria, and also the different subsectors delivering in to make it more efficient and clear for all actors. And then also the coordination on volumes will help, because of course it doesn't help the supply if we all want the things to get delivered at the same time.
Yeah, thank you very much. Let's move over to Kat. What is the UK perspective? Are you ready for ramp up of the supply chain? You seem to have a bit more stability. You seem to be well on track to reach your 2030 goals. We're a bit jealous of that. It's good to hear after the last auction round. Yeah, please share your thoughts on how ready the UK is for the European supply chain ramp up.
Yeah, so first to look at the big picture. When I speak to investors, some of them are showing some anxiety around political signals that we're hearing in some parts of Europe, but also globally around the future of renewables and the future of offshore wind. And I think it's really important to emphasize that if you look at our last auction round, we are generating power at a cost 40% less than it would cost to build and run new gas-fired power plants. So we all, I think, really need to get the message out to investors and to the supply chain that offshore wind is a really cheap and efficient way to go, and it has a very strong future in Europe. And then I think from our perspective, a couple of things are very key in terms of the UK supply chain. Firstly is having the right government support framework in place. So we have this industrial strategy in place which looks carefully at the critical gaps in the supply chain and then aims to target government support at filling those gaps, also with a long-term perspective on demand. And then at a Europe level, as Irina and Amanda have said, the visibility on volumes and timing is really key. Although we obviously have, we have real over demand in some areas like HVDC equipment and areas like vessels, ports, and so on. In other areas, I've heard that some factories are standing at 60% capacity. So there are clearly some issues between the supply and demand sides. And hopefully our coordination now can help to address that. And I think the two-sided CFDs, obviously just agreed now between Germany and Denmark, very positive. We are looking at that too. I think those will help given investors confidence to ramp up. One final point, which is really important though, is that obviously in the UK, we think it's right that Europe should be strengthening European supply chains. We need to diversify and we need to make sure that our supply is resilient. What is more worrying is when we hear of maybe the tendency in Brussels to start talking now about very narrow definitions of what a European supply chain is. And I actually think we could really undermine the pace of development in the North Sea if we start to say, well, actually, this country is out or that country is out. I think we need to make sure that when we're doing these tenders, when we're thinking about what the European supply chain is, that the UK is definitely included in that, as well as other trusted European partners and some of our key global trading partners where we have free trade agreements in place. Otherwise, we could end up going backwards.
Thank you very much. I just see our industrial policy expert here in the background, very heavily nodding, seems to strongly agree with what you said. So, yeah, thanks for your perspective. My follow-up question would be maybe to Amanda. What is the most important step towards a more coordinated North Sea industrial policy for offshore wind? We've been talking about tenders. What kind of industrial policy should underline or should be at work here to coordinate this ramp up? Is it the Net Zero Industry Act the main instrument?
Well, the Net Zero Industry Act is at least an instrument, and it is coming now. And what we've heard from the industry, but also from many sides, is that it's important that we don't end up with 27 completely different regimes. So I think it's important to have a dialogue across countries and see how much we can harmonize it, because of course there are some things that might make more sense in some countries than others. But I think it's important for it not to be too different, because it makes it much more costly also for the project developers to bid if it's very, very different in different countries how it works. And it can also create a competition between the countries that we are not looking for, because we all need more renewable energy. But yeah, so the tender criteria is definitely one thing. And I mean, it is also happening a lot within the European Union. And then I think also, for example, the NSEC as a forum, and also the dialogue with the UK. But I think it's also really important to stay in close dialogue with the industry, and also to hear what do you need, what is actually helpful, in order to avoid making some rules but with the best intentions, but that end up having some effects that we don't want, or kind of having a backlash. So I think it's very important that the things that we do, or the steps that we do take, needs to also be in close dialogue with the stakeholders that it affects.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, maybe a question for Irina. You've heard about the very strategic, very long-term approach of the British government to see what they have, what they need. Would you like to see that in Germany as well, or do you see it in Germany like we've just heard from Kat?
I mean, the UK has been is playing one of the best roles when it comes to offshore wind. Since day one, they had a very clear vision on how offshore wind works, and it didn't matter which government or which prime minister was in the Downing Street. It was always a reliable way forward. And I think if we in Germany would have had that experience, we would have more than 10 gigawatts by now. So clear message, yes. I am in different perspectives. I'm a great fan of the UK, so especially, but when it comes to offshore wind, so let's go and see how we can mirror the successes the UK had.
Okay, yeah. Very important question, also very sensitive to some extent, is how to strike the right balance between strengthening the European offshore wind supply chain and continuing to use global markets without creating new dependencies. Yeah, how does the UK look at that topic? You also have some localization rules in place, Kat. You want to highlight a bit from your perspective, yeah, how do you deal with that topic?
So thanks, Hans. You're right that localization, when it plays a role when it comes to resilient supply chains, and you have to think about what kind of localization requirements you're going to have or encourage, actually, in your tenders, while being mindful of your commitments under an international law and to your trading partners. But I think for us, what's really key here is really understanding the market and understanding supply chains, because if you take these, if you adopt quite broad brush positions on supply chains without understanding how businesses are actually operating, you can really risk unintended consequences. And that's why we've invested quite a lot of time and money into working with businesses to better understand what our global supply chains look like, which allows us to see, okay, where are the weaknesses? Where have we got a number of different partners who we think are reliable? And where are the weaknesses? Where is it really important for us to look at building up capacity in the UK from a security perspective, but also from a sort of future competitiveness perspective? So where do we want to have that local capacity? I think you also just have to do that in dialogue with your close partners, which is one of the real achievements of the North Sea format, actually, because what we're talking about here is a European supply chain with lots of complementary capacity. We shouldn't compete with each other for that capacity. We should look at together where are the gaps and how can we all play a role in the most efficient way possible. So that's what I hope we can continue to do through NSEC, for example, and through multilateral and bilateral conversations.
Yeah, thank you very much. Maybe over to you, Irina. How do you look at that topic, and to what extent to rely on the European supply chain? How open should we be towards the global market? How do you assess that tension that we see here?
Well, in the last 10, 20 years, our governments were very keen on various reasons, and I think the right reason, to act globally, to have a globalized market. Now we see, I don't know if I should say that, but we see some weirdos and making that idea irrational. So, what Catherine said, we need to look at countries and partners that are trustworthy, that share the same values, and then look which components we need from which country and try to collect those components. So saying no-goes, I think it's difficult for all different areas of the economy. We all urge to have electrical vehicles. We have the huge challenge of climate change. I think it should be one of our major goals, because otherwise nothing is worthwhile. And therefore, it is very, very difficult to say we are not talking to this country, we're not talking to that country. But again, values needs to be screened, and then look how they could be fitted into our supply chain. But nevertheless, the European, and not the European Union, but the European continent is already very strong. So I think having a little bit more faith in the development in new technology could make our life much easier. And that would also mean maybe to have a little bit more flexibility in rules and regulation and norms, how to implement new products. Because I can just tell you from our own company, we're working on a EU patent. It takes very long time, and that slows down the development, and that also slows down the supply chain. So I think we could be strong enough to do so. We have the main players for offshore wind in Europe, on the continent, and let's push that. And again, what I said many times before, have a strong pipeline that the industry can rely on.
Yeah, thank you very much. over to you, Amanda. How does Denmark look at that topic of, or is that, do you see it as a tension, how much to rely on the European market, and to what extent to look elsewhere for sourcing parts and technology?
I mean, it's definitely a discussion that has started to take up a lot more space the last few years compared to previously, due to the geopolitical advancements. And I mean, in general, Denmark is a small and very open economy, and it's very pro-trading. But we've also seen now that we need to be a lot more careful about, who are we depending on and for what, and how these dependency can also be used as a weapon against us. So I think looking at it more nuanced to see where do we not see any problems with trading, and where do we need more diversification, and who are we depending on for what, is something that we're looking more closely into. But it's not really like a finished solution on how do we handle all different components or countries, but it's something that we are further looking into, but also kind of looking at it more broadly to see what do we need to achieve on the security agenda. But it's in general interesting also how much of these things is achieved through industrial policy, how much is part of the tenders, and how much is kind of regulation on security and other things. But yeah, we don't have the golden solution yet.
Okay, thank you very much. That topic is probably a good transition to our next big topic that we're looking at, security and resilience of offshore wind infrastructure, which is seen as critical infrastructure. Maybe just a short technical comment. We're happy to have a number of questions already in the chat, which we'll be dealing with in a short while. Feel free to put even more questions in the chat. We will have some time at the end of this event to discuss what the audience wants to see discussed with us. We have one important element here, as I said, security and resilience of offshore wind infrastructure that we'd like to move to. We'll now have to improvise because my next question would have been to Niels Anger. How does stronger focus on security and resilience of offshore infrastructure affect planning and investment certainty from the government's perspective? Maybe you should just turn that towards Irina and ask how the industry is looking at this phenomenon. Stronger focus on security and resilience. Are you worried about costs and responsibilities? Do you see enough clarity here? What's being expected from the sector? And please share your thoughts on that.
Yes. It was very interesting. Yesterday, I had the chance at a roundtable to discuss that topic in particular, and it was also a privilege that BWO is recognized or acknowledged as a good partner for the topic of security. And the Norwegian Prime Minister, as well as the NATO representative, was at that table, and everyone agreed that we are facing very difficult times, and that the offshore industry is definitely in danger because of hybrid threats. We see that ourselves, and the company I'm the managing director of, we have a 24/7 control center, so we do a lot of sea surveillance, and we see vessels that don't belong there. So there are threats. There will be more threats when it comes to drones, and for us, it's important to keep our people who are working out there safe. Most important, and then of course keeping the wind farm itself safe. So there are two directives in place who are building a very good foundation. That's the CER directive as well as the NIS2. And what I learned yesterday, to my surprise, that these directives, European directives, are obviously interpreted differently in the countries. So that was indeed a surprise. But both regulations are very helpful. So what we for the industry or for the operators, but also for the supply chain, need to do is that we act according those directives. We need to intensify the maritime sea surveillance. We need to intensify control access. There are already solutions in place to do sea surveillance by cable monitoring with the fiber optic cables. But also we need to focus on OT security. So clear segmentation, secure remote access, just name it. And we know that offshore wind farms have already done a lot, because again, even though we never wanted to become critical infrastructure on basis of the current situation, we have always been somewhat critical infrastructure. So we already invested and brought a lot of things to the table. So for us in the industry, it's important that we think about security by design. What do we already have? What do the security authorities need? Let's keep a discussion ongoing and always have that discussion on current insights. So that's what we need to do. And we also must be very honest that if the governments or the security authorities give offshore wind the burden of taking security measures offshore and also pay for it, then we talk about a different CFD regime again. I know when it comes to security and also safety, it's always difficult talking about money. But we have to be honest, that's also part and could be a burden for the future. But again, the offshore industry has already implemented a lot of measures. And I think the two directives I mentioned, this too, and CER, gives us a good foundation. But please, to everyone in the governments and security authorities, let's keep a discussion ongoing, and don't just kick the ball into the field and say, now have fun with it and make sure you can comply with it. Because I'm sure, and I spoke to a lot of our members, that they say, we will do our part within the scope of capabilities, but let's don't make it too difficult on us.
Okay, yeah, maybe over to you, Amanda. You've heard from Irina that implementation of European directives might be different in one country and another. We've talked about this topic in December, I think it was, at your embassy in Berlin. Yeah, maybe you can just explain a little bit how the Danish perspective is on NIS implementation.
Yes. So in Denmark, both the NIS2 directive and the CER directive were implemented into one bill for the energy sector. So they chose like a sector-specific approach and to have it in the same law, because it's kind of two sides of the same coin. And I mean, the law was started being active from March this year. So it's also new for the companies, and the authorities are also getting feedback on how is it working, because it is the regulation to increase security is putting more burden on the companies to report on more things and to undertake more analysis and to be more ready depending on their importance and how important they are for the energy system, but also like the size, how much are they delivering. But I think that the situation, or at least what we heard in the discussions back in December, was that it was also quite different depending on what kind of energy infrastructure we're talking about, and if it's cybersecurity or the physical security, where we heard from the cybersecurity side that actually what's in NIS2 and the implementation is really good. Now it just needs to kind of come alive, and we need to get experience with this. Whereas with physical security, it's quite different from depending on what kind of infrastructure type we're talking about. So it might not be a clear-cut need on how to do it, but we might need to look more from, the grid is different to an offshore wind plant, and that's different to other assets. And I think that there also for sure needs to be more discussion. Irina mentioned the costs and who bears them. I think that in general there's an agreement on that we need to increase the level of security, and it's not for free. But how do we divide this burden? And the energy sector is getting more intertwined with what has previously more been national security and defense, but it's not quite clear how to split the costs and the benefits for the whole society. And I think there it's just important to keep the dialogue going, and also to be aware and closely monitor the new possibilities from new technology. We also mentioned monitoring, for example, from cables as well. But I think the verdict isn't still out, but we're excited about the implementation and have heard a lot of good reactions from the industry as well.
Thank you for your perspective. Question to Kat. I remember we had a very early discussion, a wonderful event, BWO, with your embassy in Berlin. I'm not sure, was it 2 years ago? Was it 3 years ago? We raised this topic on a bigger stage. And what I took away from it, that the UK was a very early mover in that regard, because you had the London Olympics, and you have in the River Thames, mouth of the River Thames, you already had a big wind farm there. And you had to come up with some measures on how to organize protection of your critical infrastructure. What is the current discussion on your side? Are you happy with collaboration with other European countries on security topics? And how do you discuss cost issues these days in the UK?
So you're right, Hans, that we moved quite early on this, and we have a very whole system approach to maritime security. We've set up something called the Joint Maritime Security Centre, where we have lots of different players all working together to monitor what's happening 24/7. So we've got the Navy, the Coast Guard, Border Force, Home Office, so our Interior Ministry, Ministry of Defence, and lots of others. And that provides quite a good, certainly on the physical side, but also getting more into the cyber side as well, quite a good sort of cross-system approach. We are reliant on industry, of course, and it's sort of a joint responsibility to ensure the security. We are often talking to industry about adapting to the new kinds of threats and making sure they provide us with the data so that we can provide on the government side the immediate response if we do identify a threat. One of the things we think we could do more of across Europe is just share information so that we can do more to identify threat patterns. We have quite a good informal grouping on the gas infrastructure side, actually, where we talk between governments and major players about what we're seeing in terms of threats and behaviours around infrastructure in the gas sector, and something similar in the offshore wind sector might be a good idea. So you're doing a lot, like, yes, of course, we have formal info exchange, but actually more informal paths with industry can give industry confidence to share their suspicions or sort of what they're perceiving in terms of threats as well.
Okay, thank you very much. We have 15 minutes left in this event. We have a number of questions, but before we come to the questions, maybe a short round of your views on the implementation. It's a pity not to have Niels Anger with us anymore here. He wrote in the chat that he wants to keep in touch with us, and I'm sure that's yeah, his invitation. Yeah, he will be ready to talk to us during our major conference on May 20 and 21, our Zukunft Offshore, Future Offshore Conference here in Berlin. So we will talk about implementation of all these wonderful declarations there in greater detail. Maybe just a quick round here. Maybe start with you, Kat. What are your expectations? What concrete steps are you hoping for to see all this implemented in the near future?
So we've said a little bit already about the specific working groups and so on that have been set up to support flagship projects. And I think that those groups will play a very important role. But I couldn't leave today without talking about the relationship between the UK and the EU, and particularly in terms of NSEC membership for the UK. So the UK becoming a full member of NSEC, so we can fully participate in some of this really critical decision making for implementation, but also to make sure we get a strong outcome in terms of electricity trading arrangements. You know, for a lot of hybrid infrastructure, it will only be cost effective if we can get those more efficient arrangements in place. But although this is obviously win-win for both UK and European countries, it's not always easy to keep focused on the energy security and economic objectives at hand when we're in those negotiations. So just to plead that that is critical for implementation, and we hope to make good progress on that.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's move on with Amanda. Before we come to you, Irina, I think the first question of the audience would be good for you. So do a first round up with you, Amanda, and then move on to Irina. So please go ahead.
Thank you. So I agree what Kat said about the working groups and getting more concrete. And I think in general, the energy minister's declaration, as well as the action plan, they do outline a concrete way forward. And from a Danish point of view, so does the strategic partnership between Germany and Denmark, where we also continue to work concretely about specific projects and kind of using the more overarching goals in the declaration, but also to see how this can be used in the concrete areas that we're already collaborating on. And we also feel in very safe and capable hands with the German presidency of the NSEC, and we're looking forward to continue to work more in detail over the next couple of months, on the action plan and the different steps in the minister's declaration.
Yeah, thank you very much. Looking forward to our exchange on that over the next few months. So now over to you, Irina. What are your expectations when it comes to implementation of what happened yesterday in Berlin and Hamburg, of course?
Let's say it very easy. Let's get going. I mean, there are lots of declarations, and we need to work on those. And only for Germany here, that means finalize and launch the CFD framework. We need that stability and predictability. Then we need a binding offshore tender schedule, but also an implementation plan, which wind farm shall be commissioned when, in order to satisfy the supply chain. And then also something none of us really wants to, but we are forced to have a security by design. We need to improve there and find solutions on technical and economical sharing rules. So, but again, let's start again. That's most important.
Yeah, thank you very much. Let's stick with you for a moment because we have the first question from the audience, comes from the supply chain, to our colleague Johannes Schiel from Vestas. He would like to know what the position of BWO is on the design and the timeline when it comes to the repetition of the auction that failed in August 2025. We said this before. We told the ministry, please let's not have another auction. What are your thoughts? How should we deal with that? What do you like to have instead? think you said it before, but maybe you want to repeat it to have it as a clear message now.
I think it was a message sent by the industry, also from the utilities and the offshore wind owners, operators, that it probably does not make any sense to have that auction now. And it's like telling children not to put your hand in the oven, and now we do it again. Sorry to say it that way, but let's see and wait. I really have my doubts. And I've seen there's a question later up also coming, that we have current projects that are in between the old and the new world, which have a difficult time finding a business case. So it's a pity. And I think it was yesterday I heard a couple of voices from the ministries that they are aware of that, but there are obviously some urgent requirements which I'm not aware of, but that basically led them to the decision to keep going, at least for this year.
Okay, thank you very much. Quick question from Ursula from NBW to the UK and Denmark representatives. What are your expectations, how the cooperation will be further developed in institutional terms? What kind of level, institution, kind of group should be responsible here? Just a very short answer, please, because we'd like to hear some more answers to other questions. Kat, do you want to start?
Yeah, so I think NSEC can play a really important role in this, but again, like I've just said, with full UK membership, ideally. And then I also think groups like BVO, like the OTC group, are critical. So bringing together industry to give us an efficient way to interact with government and regulators.
Amanda?
Yes, I agree fully with Kath. And I think also that the NSEC Fora, I mean, there's also going to be a lot of collaboration going on a smaller level. So, for example, between Denmark and Germany, but that we can also bring experiences in to the other foras to learn from each other.
Yeah, thank you very much. We have a question from Petra Sorge from Bloomberg to all. Germany's BWO wind group, that's us, today said that the 30 gigawatt offshore goal 2030 will be missed by 10 gigawatts and not reached before 2032. How does that impact your North Sea expansion goals? My answer would be it does not. We are well on track if we get more investment security to reach the goal for 2035 in time, or maybe even before time. Do you agree, Irina? Is that what you would say, or what you would answer to that as well?
It's always a little bit funny. It's not about two numbers. It's not about do we reach 30 or 29 or 32 gigawatts. It's about that we follow this continuous path, and there will always be dents during the course of the year, but keeping the energy to that route, that's the most important.
Thank you. We have a question concerning offshore electrolysis, producing hydrogen. Is that what that means? It was also mentioned yesterday at the North Sea Summit. Maybe over to you, Kat and Amanda. What role should offshore electrolysis play in the cooperation projects that were discussed in Hamburg? What is your expectation?
So just to jump in, I think we do see hydrogen as a really important part of the mix. And actually, from a UK perspective, maybe in Hamburg, we could have spoken even more about hydrogen and CCUS as well. But it is like offshore electrolysis is almost like the next step in the process. So I think if we can firm up the plans for the hybrid infrastructure, then we should make sure that our energy islands are flexible and that we can bolt on, different additional connections, electrolysis, and so on as projects become commercially viable.
Okay, Amanda, do you want to add?
Yeah, I agree very much with what Catherine said. And in general, we see hydrogen as a really important way forward. And the infrastructure is key, whether it's produced onshore, offshore, or both. I think time will tell, and we need both, but it's also about setting an intention, also getting the regulatory framework ready to allow it, and to what extent and how much will also be up to the market.
Okay, thank you very much. I'd like to skip this question because we might only have time for a few others. That seems to be a bit far away. What this colleague would like to know, we will come back to that at some later event, about storage of offshore wind electricity via hydrogen. Just talked about hydrogen. Okay, can someone please explain how the offshore wind bidding zone will work? That would have been a good question for Niels Anger. Will there be a single zone covering all North Sea countries? And how are already tendered or operating wind farms included here? What concrete steps are being taken to provide a clear and stable framework for developers and investors? Does anyone want to take that question? I wouldn't be able to explain how an offshore wind bidding zone would work. Maybe we should take that to our annual conference, Zukunft Offshore, where we have a bit more time to go into details. Do you agree? I've seen some nodding heads here, which is good. Okay, so maybe one last question. What is the plan from Daniel from BirdLife Europe? What is the plan for sea basin level measures to ensure that we achieve renewable energy targets and biodiversity targets, including to reach and maintain a good status of marine habitats and species? So maybe over to you, Amanda. How do you look at biodiversity targets and European cooperation at the sea basin level?
Yeah, there was also an interesting discussion about spatial planning, but also to take care of the environment yesterday, and especially the Dutch energy minister came with some good points. But I think this is an area where we can learn a lot from each other in terms of software, algorithms, map layers to see, and also what mechanisms or actions that we can take place in the offshore wind farm to mitigate effects. I think it's a lot about sharing what works and experiences across countries to extend the knowledge, but also bring costs down so that we can both get as much energy as possible and to a cheap price, but also without sacrificing the environment.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Amanda. Thank you very much, Kat. Thank you very much, Irina, and also Niels Anger, of course. It was great to have you here to discuss this big event we've seen in Hamburg yesterday. This event here was the biggest online event BWO has organized so far. We had hundreds of registered participants out here. I hope everyone enjoyed this as much as I did. We will come back to you soon with another BWO expertise. Then you will have Stefan Timm, our managing director, in my place here again. He's on holidays these days. And yeah, very much enjoyed this round. Thank you very much. And yeah, have a good afternoon.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.